There's a manila envelope on the Christmas dinner table. It has been sitting there for 11 minutes and no one has touched it yet. 14 people are in this room. The pine cone centerpiece is in the middle of the table. The dishes have been cleared. The coffee is still warm. My mother is at the head of the table where she has sat at every family Christmas for 30 years. And she is looking at the envelope the way people look at something they already sense is going to cost them. My name is Fiona Calloway. I am 34 years old. I have been sitting at this table for 6 years, in the sense that matters. Quietly, without announcement, doing the one thing nobody else in this family was willing to do. Inside that envelope are 2 certified copies of a deed transfer granted by the Muskingum County Court of Common Pleas in September 2022. Both properties, my grandmother Ruth's Victorian house on Clover Street and the small rental cottage behind it, are in my name. Have been for over 2 years. My mother does not know this yet. My sister does not know this yet. Nobody in this room knows this yet except me. What they knew, what they had all agreed without discussion, was the complete truth of the matter, was that Fiona was the quiet one. Fiona was the one who handled the small practical things. Fiona was background noise. Fiona was not the kind of person things were given to or fought over or named in obituaries. They'd been operating on that version of me for so long that it had never once occurred to any of them to look up and check whether it was still accurate. I slide the envelope toward my mother. I do not raise my voice. This is that story. Before I tell you what happened when Renata Calloway picked up that deed and read the name at the top of it, I want to pause for just a moment. If you have ever been the one who did the actual work, the invisible one, the practical one, the one who shows up and handles things and gets written out of the story before it is even finished, drop your location and your local time in the comments, subscribe to this channel, and know that what you are about to hear was made for you. The quiet builders are the ones who end up holding the documents. Now let me take you back to November 2016 to a family meeting in a living room in Zanesville, Ohio, where a 26-year-old woman sat at a table while her family divided her grandmother's estate and did not once use her name. I grew up in eastern Ohio, the younger of 2 daughters. My mother, Renata Calloway, was 54 when this story begins, a woman who ran the front desk at a chiropractic office in Zanesville, kept her Buick Enclave immaculate, and posted Bible verses and inspirational quotes on Facebook on alternating days. She attended First Baptist every Sunday and mentioned it in conversation the way some people mention having gone to a good school, not as information but as a credential. She was not a shouting woman. She did not make scenes. Her particular kind of cruelty was administrative. The revised list, the omitted name, the decision already made before you arrived. She managed people the way she managed her desk, by deciding in advance what was relevant and filing everything else somewhere it would not cause disruption. My sister Amber was 5 years older than me, married to a drywall contractor named Troy, and living in a subdivision outside Zanesville with their 3 children. Amber was not a mean person. I want to say that clearly. She was simply a person who had been told for so long that things would come to her that she had never developed the habit of going to get them. She accepted what was offered, set it down wherever was convenient, and moved on to the next thing. The idea that something she had been given might require sustained maintenance had genuinely never lodged itself in her thinking. This was not character, it was a failure of imagination that my mother had spent 31 years carefully cultivating in her. My grandmother, Ruth Elaine Calloway, lived in a Victorian house on Clover Street in a small town 40 minutes from where I lived. She was 81 years old when she died in October 2016, and in the final 2 years of her life I drove to that house 3 times a week. I managed her medications. I drove her to appointments: the cardiologist, the pediatrist, the ophthalmologist, the pharmacy. I sat with her on Tuesday evenings and watched whatever she had recorded during the week, and ate the shortbread cookies she kept in a tin on the kitchen counter that she was technically not supposed to have, but that I never said anything about. Ruth was the most specific person I have ever loved. She had opinions about everything: the correct way to fold a fitted sheet, the underratedness of the state of Vermont, the particular uselessness of people who said they would pray for you instead of actually doing something. She died on a Thursday morning in October, quietly in her own bed, the way she had said she intended to. My mother organized the funeral. She wrote the obituary. She submitted it to the Zanesville Times Recorder. The obituary listed Ruth's surviving children. My mother is the sole surviving daughter and her grandchildren. Amber's name was there. Amber's 3 children were listed by first name. My name was not there. I read it in the paper the morning it ran, and I sat with my coffee and I read the list of surviving grandchildren twice to confirm what I was seeing. Then I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. I told her my name was not in the obituary. She said the funeral home had a word limit and she'd had to make choices. She said it the way you say something that is technically a sentence but that is designed to end the conversation rather than have it. I said, "You chose to leave out one of Ruth's 2 grandchildren." She said she was very busy and that we could talk about it later. We did not talk about it later. I want to stop here for a moment, because I know some of you watching right now understand that particular experience. Being edited out of a narrative that is supposed to include you. By someone who has the pen? Not with cruelty exactly. With administrative convenience. If that lives in your memory the way it lives in mine, I want you to subscribe to this channel and leave a comment below. Tell me where you are. This community was built for the people who were left out of the list. You are not invisible here. The family meeting was held in Renata's living room in November 2016, 3 weeks after the funeral. My mother, my sister, Amber's husband Troy, and I sat around the coffee table with cups of tea. Nobody was really drinking. Ruth had died intestate, no formal will. Under Ohio law, everything passed to Renata as the sole surviving child. Renata had prepared for the meeting the way she prepared for everything. She had a handwritten list. She walked through it item by item. Ruth's savings account, modest, a little over $4,000, would be split between Renata and Amber for funeral costs and incidentals. The Victorian on Clover Street would go to Amber because Amber had 3 children and could use the space. The rear cottage would also go to Amber since the 2 properties shared a lot and it made sense to keep them together. The sewing cabinet, Ruth's grandmother's sewing cabinet, the one with the carved rosewood inlay that Ruth had shown me when I was 7 years old and told me would be mine someday. The words "yours someday" said clearly in Ruth's specific voice, and that specific kitchen. The sewing cabinet would also go to Amber because it would look nice in her front room. I was sitting at the table. Nobody looked at me. Nobody said, "What does Fiona think?" or "Fiona was there every week for 2 years." Or "We should ask Fiona what she needs." Nobody said my name at all, as far as I can remember, for the duration of that meeting. My mother folded the handwritten list into her Bible when we were done. The way you file something you are satisfied with and do not expect to revisit. I drove home. I did not call anyone. I sat in my apartment that night and I understood something very clearly. Not with anger, though the anger was there. In a lower register, below the clarity. I understood that my family had a settled and complete version of me that had no room in it for the person I actually was, and I understood sitting there that I had 2 choices. I could spend the next decade trying to revise their version of me from the inside, asking to be seen differently, explaining myself, lobbying for a place on a list. Or I could stop asking entirely and simply do what I had always done, which was to see what needed doing and do it, and let the results be their own argument. I chose the second thing. I did not tell anyone. Within 6 weeks of the family meeting, while processing Ruth's paperwork to update the address on some of her utility accounts, I discovered that the Clover Street property taxes had not been paid since 2014, 2 years before Ruth died. She had been declining faster than any of us had said aloud, and the taxes had slipped. By January 2017, the total arrears on the Clover Street property were $48.40 and $140, and the county had begun the delinquency process. The rear cottage was behind by $2,210. Both properties were moving, slowly and officially, toward foreclosure. I consulted an attorney in January 2017, a property lawyer in Zanesville named Carol Dietz, who had the specific and useful quality of explaining complicated things plainly and without condescension. Carol walked me through Ohio's tax foreclosure process, the delinquency cure timeline, and, because I asked her directly, the relevant provisions of Ohio Revised Code regarding adverse possession and documented stewardship. She explained that a party who pays delinquent taxes, maintains the property, carries insurance, and documents continuous exclusive stewardship over a statutory period has legal standing to petition for deed transfer if the titled owner fails to maintain their obligations and fails to cure within the statutory period. Carol looked at me over her reading glasses when she finished explaining this and said, "You'd need to document everything, every payment, every repair, every notice. And you'd need to be patient." I told her I was good at both of those things. I paid the $4,840 Clover Street arrears in February 2017. I paid the $2,210 cottage arrears in March. I opened a dedicated accordion folder, physical, labeled in my handwriting, with tabbed sections for each property, tax receipts, insurance renewals, repair invoices, certified mail records, county notices, photographs. I created a parallel digital folder with scanned copies of everything, backed up in 2 places. I made every payment by check or traceable electronic transfer. I kept notes. I was thorough in the way someone is thorough when they understand that the record is the argument and the argument has to be airtight. I said nothing to my family. I mentioned none of it to Amber. When Renata asked in passing how I was doing in the spring of 2017, I said fine, work was steady. The drive was long. She said good, and moved on. She had no idea I was spending my Saturday mornings at the county treasurer's office. By the end of 2017, Amber had made 0 payments on either property. She had visited the Clover Street house once to take Ruth's dining set, which I watched leave in the back of Troy's work truck from across the street. In 2018, she used the house for a weekend when her furnace broke and she needed somewhere for her kids to sleep. She did not pay the utility bills from that weekend. I paid them. I documented it. In 2019, I mentioned the tax arrears to my mother. Not to ask for help, but to give her the opportunity to do something about it. I told her the Clover Street taxes were 3 years behind, that I had been covering them, and that the county process was not going to wait indefinitely. Renata said, "That's between Amber and the county. Don't insert yourself." She did not call Amber. She did not ask me how much I had paid. She changed the subject to her church's upcoming fall fundraiser. I went home and I added that conversation to my notes. Date, time, summary of what was said. Everything went in the folder. By the end of 2018, I had paid $9,340 in cumulative taxes, insurance, and basic maintenance across both properties. I had replaced a section of the Clover Street porch railing that had rotted through, because an unaddressed structural deficiency would have become a liability and an insurance issue. I had paid to have the cottage's gutters cleared twice, once in the fall and once after a winter that left debris across both downspouts. Small things, documented things. The kind of maintenance that a property requires when someone is paying attention, and the kind that disappears quietly into catastrophe when no one is. There is something I want to say about those years, because I do not want you to think this was a cold exercise in legal strategy. It was not. The Clover Street house was my grandmother's house. I had been inside it hundreds of times. I knew which step on the back staircase creaked and where Ruth kept her spare key, and exactly how the afternoon light came through the kitchen window in October at about 3 in the afternoon and fell across the counter in a way that Ruth had told me she had always loved. I was not managing an asset. I was protecting a place that had meant something, that had been loved by someone who was gone, that was sitting empty and untended while the people who had been given it were not looking. I would have done it regardless of what the law eventually allowed. The legal outcome is the consequence of the care, not the reason for it. In 2020, as I moved into my 4th year of stewardship, I began working more closely with Carol Dick to build the formal petition. The process required 5 years of documented continuous maintenance and exclusive financial responsibility, a clear record of the titled owner's non-participation, and a formal petition filed with the county court. We were building toward a March 2021 filing. I spent the fall and winter of 2020 with Carol going through every document in the accordion folder. 41 pages of exhibits in the final petition. I want you to understand what 41 pages of documentation looks like. It looks like 6 years of a person choosing every single time to show up. Carol filed the petition with the Muskingum County Court of Common Pleas on March 8, 2021. Amber was served notice. She called me 2 days later. She said she had always meant to deal with the taxes but that she'd had a lot going on. I said, "I know, Amber." I did not elaborate. She did not file a response. Renata called me that same week. She told me I was tearing the family apart. She told me I had gone behind everyone's backs. She told me Ruth would not have wanted this. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "I'm just following the process, Mom." I let a moment sit. Then I said I had to go and I hung up and I went back to the spreadsheet I had been working on before she called. I was running both processes in parallel during this period, the legal case and my actual life. I had moved from part-time bookkeeping to full-time by 2019, had taken on a second bookkeeping client and then a third, and by 2021 I was managing the accounts for 4 small businesses in the county and had a schedule I controlled entirely. I had moved into a small house I was renting with an option to buy. My life was quiet and organized, and mine in a way it had not always been, and I want to be honest about what those years felt like. Not triumphant, not bitter, but solid. I had the sensation of standing on ground I laid myself and finding that it held. The Muskingum County Court of Common Pleas granted the deed transfer on September 14, 2022. Both properties transferred into my name. Carol called me at 2 in the afternoon and read me the language from the ruling. I thanked her. I sat in my car for a while after we hung up. I thought about Ruth's kitchen. I thought about the October light on the counter. I thought about a 26-year-old woman sitting in a living room in Zanesville while a handwritten list was read aloud and her name was not on it. I drove home. I made dinner. I filed the certified copy of the deed in the accordion folder and I started a new tab, labeled simply, Post-Transfer. I did not call my family. I waited 2 years, 2 months, and 16 days. December 2024, Renata's house in Zanesville. 14 people, 30 years of the same Christmas gathering, the same tablecloth, the same Callaway family ritual of food and noise, and the careful performance of togetherness. Renata had spent 3 weeks preparing. There was a centerpiece made of pine cones she had collected herself from the yard of the Clover Street house, Ruth's house, which she had visited once in 8 years and which she did not know was no longer in the family in the way she believed. I arrived on time. I brought a green bean casserole. I hugged my cousins. I sat through dinner and I was warm and present and entirely myself. After the plates were cleared and the coffee was poured, I set the manila envelope on the table. I said I had a small update I wanted to share with the family in person. Since we were all together, I did not raise my voice. I did not perform. I explained in plain language what the document said. I explained that the property taxes on the Clover Street house had been in arrears since 2014. I explained that the county had begun the foreclosure process in early 2017 and that I had intervened by paying the arrears. I explained that I had maintained both properties, taxes, insurance, basic repairs, continuously for 6 years. I explained that I had filed a petition with the Muskingum County Court in March 2021 and that the deed transfer had been granted in September 2022. I explained that the combined assessed value of both properties at the time of transfer was approximately $194,000. I explained that my total documented investment over 6 years was $23,780. I presented this as a series of facts. I did not editorialize. I did not accuse. I did not look at anyone in particular. I slid the certified deed copies toward my mother and I let the room read them. Renata's sister Beverly, my Aunt Beverly, who I've always liked, who has always been the one in the room willing to say what she is actually thinking, looked at her sister and then looked at me and said quietly, "She paid those taxes for 6 years and nobody knew?" No one answered her. Troy looked at Amber. Amber looked at the table. The pine cone centerpiece sat in the middle of everything. My mother picked up the deed. She read it. She set it down. Then she said, "You went behind this family's back. You manipulated a legal process to steal from your own sister." I said, "I went to the county treasurer's office. I went to a lawyer. I went to court. All of those things are public record, Mom. You could have checked it any time." She said, "Fiona," I said. The court reviewed 6 years of documentation and granted the transfer. That is what happened. Amber said, "I always meant to deal with those taxes, I just had a lot going on." I looked at her. I said, "I know." That was the end of what needed to be said. I collected my documents. I finished my coffee. I helped carry 3 plates to the kitchen. Because I am a person who clears plates when dinner is over, regardless of the situation. I said goodnight to my cousins. I hugged Aunt Beverly, who held on for a moment longer than the hug required and did not say anything, which was exactly right. I left at 8:42. I drove home on the interstate with the radio on. I was the sole owner of 2 properties. I was 34 years old. I turned the radio up a little and I drove through the dark in the fields of eastern Ohio, and I felt, completely and without drama, that the correct thing had been established, and that it did not require anything further from me. Renata did not speak to me for 11 weeks. She called in February, a Sunday afternoon, and I knew it was a Sunday because she always calls on Sundays after church. She started with, "I want to understand why you felt you had to do it this way." I said, "I did it the way the law allowed, Mom. I protected something nobody else was protecting." She cried. The crying was real. I want to say that clearly. She was genuinely in pain, and I understood that the pain was real even if its source was complicated. I was kind to her. I talked with her for 34 minutes. I did not apologize. There was nothing to apologize for. Amber texted twice in January. The first text was long and aggrieved and used the word unfair 4 times. I did not respond to it. 6 days later, a second text arrived. It was one line. "I should have dealt with the taxes." "I know that," I replied. "I know you know." That was all. I have thought, in the months since, about what I would say to the 26-year-old sitting in her car after that family meeting in November 2016, driving home on a gray afternoon with nothing from her grandmother's estate and her own name missing from the obituary. I think I would sit next to her for a minute. I would not tell her it would be fine. I would tell her to keep the folder, to document everything, to pay the taxes, to find Carol Dage, to understand that the record she was about to build was not just a legal strategy. It was the only true account of what actually happened, in a family where the official account had always been written by someone else and had always left her out. I would tell her that the version of her that her family held was not accurate and never had been, and that she did not need them to correct it. The court would correct it. The deed would correct it. 41 pages of documented evidence would correct it, in language precise enough to be binding. There is something my mother said at that Christmas table that I have kept turning over. She said I had gone behind the family's back. I understand why she said it, but I want to be precise about what actually happened. I went to the county treasurer. I went to a lawyer. I filed a petition in a court of law. I did all of this in my own name, with documents that were public record the entire time, in a process that any member of my family could have observed at any point simply by paying attention. I did not go behind anyone's back. I went ahead of them. That is a different thing entirely. They gave me nothing and forgot to notice what I did with it. So I want to ask you something, and I want you to take a moment with it before you answer. If you were the one who did all the work, the one who showed up, quietly, without credit, without recognition, without your name on the list, at what point did you stop asking to be seen and start simply being undeniable? Not the moment you announced it. The moment before that. The moment you decided. Leave your answer below. I read every one.